is a little introduction to some very strange places on this planet. Technically, they do not exist. They're not recognized by the international community, yet they have persisted in some form of statehood since 1991. There are basically 4 of these places. And I'm going to talk to you about 3 of them, because I haven't been to the 4th one. You may have heard of the 4th one, South Ossetia, which was the location of a war in 2008 when the Russians intervened after Georgia attempted to take back that secessionist region. Most of these conflicts reflect, good heavens, what is happening? From beginning, most of these conflicts, but not all of them, reflect civil wars. These areas were formed at the demise of the Soviet Union in 1991. Nestorian Moldavian Republic is one of them, and that's the last one we'll visit today. It figures prominently in my book, Bastard Republic. Abkhazia, Nagorno-Karabakh, and South Ossetia. How many of you have ever heard of any of these places? Good heavens. Thank you, Deb. This isn't probably going to be very helpful. This will be more helpful. For 2 of them, we have to really go to the Caucasus region, and that would be Nagorno-Karabakh. You see Armenia here, you see Azerbaijan here, but you will not see Nagorno-Karabakh on any map. No, I don't want this, thank you. This is really embarrassing. In Georgia, this little coastal area right here, which used to be known as the Soviet Riviera, is the Republic of Abkhazia. And these areas exist against all logic, unless you happen to live there. These were very bloody wars, comparatively. And in terms of Abkhazia and Karabakh, they were going on the same time of the Balkan Wars in former Yugoslavia, and America was not paying any attention to these. As you can see, the death tolls were significant, and these are just basic estimates. They're probably way under. The PMR in 1992, the war lasted just 2 months, and 2,000 people were killed in that before the Russians intervened and enforced a ceasefire, intervening on behalf of the secessionist Transnistrians to the mortification of the newly proclaimed Republic of Moldova. We'll get to that. This is the one that was not specifically an ethnic conflict. It was much more political. South Ossetia, 1,000 people in that very brief war in 1991. Abkhazia, as you can see, a 2-year war and a 3-year war in Karabakh. These are only the dead. They are not the wounded, and they're not the displaced. Europe's next war, perhaps. We are already looking at the now secessionist region in Ukraine, so you can see what happens when these frozen conflict zones become unfrozen. They're called frozen because essentially ceasefires were declared without a formal truce, and the status quo remains low these many years later. This is the national flag of Nagorno-Karabakh. So, as with these other areas, when the Soviet Union collapsed, leaving in its wake a lot of ethnic tensions that had been squashed under the Soviet Union, the NKR unilaterally secedes from Azerbaijan, declaring its independence. In this case, the divide is clearly ethnic in that the ethnic Armenians are Armenian Christian, and the Azers are Muslims. Despite that divide, for decades they coexisted very peacefully in this area. With that declaration of secession, the Azerbaijan government basically declared war on the NKR, and a very brutal and for them especially disastrous war followed, with a ceasefire in 1994. I say disastrous for a couple of reasons. If you want to know what ethnic cleansing looks like, statistics can tell you a lot. In 1990, there were 140,500 people in Nagorno-Karabakh, 75% of the population. The Azeris, what was going on? The Azeris were 46,024%, and you see these others. This was the total in NKR. Let's fast forward 2010. These are estimates. Those last figures I gave you were from the last Soviet census. 95% of the population in 2010, which is when I was there, it was ethnic Armenian. 0% Azeri. What you're looking at right there is ethnic cleansing by the numbers. And the reality is very stark. That is Nagorno-Karabakh, the historic region that had been ethnically predominantly Armenian for a long time. Stalin had promised, in exchange for joining the Soviet Union, that this area had promised Armenia, this area would become part of Armenia, and broke that promise, giving it instead to Azerbaijan because he was trying to play nice with the Turks because of oil. What you see here is what happened after the Civil War. And I liken this to Israel before 1967 and after, because the areas in gray are the security zone that are occupied by the ethnic Armenians now and are considered the exterior boundaries of Nagorno-Karabakh. Clearly, there are two provocations as far as the Azerbaijanis are concerned now. One, the independence of the core, the historic NKR, and the annexation of all of this other territory. We're going to visit both places quite soon. The capital of Nagorno-Karabakh is Stepanakert. In 1990, there were 70,000 people there. In 2010, there were 50. This is a very strange city. Right there is the Parliament building. Directly attached to it is a four-star hotel. It's very odd. On the surface, this is a very peaceful city. However, it had endured a siege and perpetual bombardment from a mountain city above it. This is all very mountainous, by the way, for 3 years by the Azeris. As in many places in this part of the world, there is this gentle rhythm of normalcy which belies the fraught history behind it. And there are some very interesting architectural details of this city that I just had to capture. This is early in April, so the fountains aren't running yet. And this stairway goes right up to the back of that strange hotel I just showed you. Civic architecture at its most interesting. No, this is not Photoshop, folks. This is part of the whimsical style of the area, I guess. The old and the new. This was the view from my hotel. Do you notice anything a little odd about that view? Those are live. The war is still very close to these people because the ceasefire is broken repeatedly. Small arms, automatic weapons, pockmarks on a lot of the buildings still downtown. If you want to really understand the mentality of the Nagornons at this point, you have to meet this woman. And you'll meet her in just a minute. Here's some more statistics about the war. It's clear that the Azeris had their hats and their heads handed to them in this war. This is a David and Goliath myth. or it may not even be a myth, when you consider how few Armenians there were and what they did to the Azeri invading army. The Azeris would say, how can we invade? It's our own country. This is one of the problems with unrecognized breakaway republics. The human cost of this war was huge, and it continues to this day. This woman started a museum for the dead. And all of the soldiers who died in that war on the side of the Armenians are in this museum. And there are about 8 rooms. And for those of you who are fans of psychology, I would say if you want to understand the mentality of the Nagornans, you have to think in terms of trauma bonding. Because the Civil War itself is used as a justification for the continuation of this unrecognized republic in defiance of international law. Armenia can't take them because of international norms. Russia won't recognize them. The Armenians still want that place back. And so it is a very uneasy stalemate. It's really an amazing place. It becomes a shrine, in a sense, to the fallen in that war. Shushi is a very interesting place. It's about 7,500 feet elevation, sitting directly above Stepanakert. And during the war, the Azers would rain artillery fire down into the city and basically enforced a siege there. The statistics, again, are very interesting. 1989, this was predominantly an ethnic Azeri market town, very prosperous. Again, if you want to know what ethnic cleansing looks like mathematically, there it is. 0. On the way up the mountain to this town, there are monuments. Here's one of them to the victorious Armenian forces. And when I say Armenian, I'm referring to ethnic Armenian, not necessarily officially the Armenian army, although they lent a lot of material and logistical support. This is what's left of this town, and there's not much left to it, really. There are a few blocks where apartment buildings are intact and people live. This was the main street, and as you can see, in 2010, it wasn't doing that well. Who lives here then? The Krikorian family lived there. They came here with the promise of a free apartment and a job. And they fled from Azerbaijan at the capital in Tbilisi. No, they fled from Georgia, actually. There are a lot of people who were fleeing other civil conflicts during that time. So in this case, this family settled in Shushi. And I just we spent a few hours with them. He got a job as a custodian, janitor, plumber, electrician at the local school. This is his wife. That's some local bread. The sons, the daughters. And life is sort of proceeding as normally as it can in the ruins of war. This is more typical of this village, town actually. Clearly uninhabitable at this point. It is life among the ruins for the 2,000 people or so who were left here. But there is this odd sense of calm and normalcy. beyond a couple of factors which I will have mentioned. I've been to a lot of places in Eastern Europe, starting back in 1988, when Romania was still under Ceausescu and was regarded as the most Stalinist country in Europe. Been to Hungary and Bulgaria during the communist time. Of course, been to Cuba. Nowhere else have I ever been, have I found a place so paranoid, and nowhere else have I been tracked so closely. When my friend Nikolai and I went into Nagorno-Karabakh, we had to go through this corridor called the Lachin Corridor, which is this little piece of land carved out of Azerbaijan that allows access from Armenia into Nagorno-Karabakh, and it's a 7-hour bus ride. When we got there, we had to report immediately to the Foreign Ministry. They issued us a visa and then said, "Where are you going?" We gave them 7 or 8 towns we wanted to visit, and they said, no. Their reason was security because of landmines. It's not safe for you. The real reason was they didn't want us to see what they had done to some of these towns that they had bombed into oblivion after they had been emptied of Azerians. Emptied so that, scorched earth, basically. If they ever have to return this, they're going to return rubble. So we were allowed, inexplicably, however, to go to one area in the security zone, which we'll get to in a little while. I think they realized it was a mistake after. But we had to present papers everywhere we went saying we had travel permission from the government. This is the only place I've ever been where I've been scrutinized that much. Oh dear. Let's see. From current slide, we'll go back to that. Nope, sorry about this. Now this is ahead of our story here, so let me back up. This thing isn't behaving well. I'm not behaving well. So, bear with me here. Not much left. This was a silk factory where they made silk thread and some silk fabrics. This was a very prosperous market town. This is what's left of that building, and there's just a lot of that. Not much at all. Very typical in that area, there's a grave marker for one of the martyrs of the war. Here's some kids playing soccer out front of a bombed out building, and you will notice also some military vehicles right there. We were questioned by the police as soon as we started talking to some older people in Shushi. The police just surrounded us and wanted to see our papers and where we were going. This tells a story. That's a bombed out armored personnel carrier right there, behind which is what's left of the mosque of this town that, remember, was predominantly Muslim before that war. There's your mosque. That's what the mosque looks like inside now. Again, if you want an indication of who won this war, take a look at that. That is obviously the Armenian Orthodox Church, which was extensively rebuilt immediately following the war. Karachar is a very interesting town in the security zone, and still for reasons that we can't understand, they gave us permission to go there. It's up in here. Very, very mountainous country, very beautiful country. We left at rush hour from Stepanakert, as you can see. This is Base Metals, which is a gold factory, essentially, owned by the president of Nagorno-Karabakh. How odd. Ruins of a former Soviet collective You can see these bombed out structures here in the mountains. These were villages. This is on the way up there. This is a ruins of a tank, across from which are the graves of the soldiers who died there. This is a desecrated Muslim cemetery. When you ask the Nagornons, where are all the Azeris? Where did they go? They act as if you've just pointed out something to them they hadn't noticed. Say, oh, well, they're nomads. And that is the official version of events. Oh, well, they're nomads. They come and go. Which isn't the case. 2 minutes after setting foot in this town, we were surrounded by army troops. I am not exaggerating. 2 minutes. And we showed them their papers, and they said, well, you have to come here. And they took us to this guy, who is the mayor. He said, what are you doing here? Why are you here? And my friend Nikolai and I said, well, we're humanist sociologists, and we are trying to understand the human condition here. And the guy nodded gravely and picked up the phone, and 5 minutes later, this guy shows up. This is David, who was introduced to us as a philosopher/historian, and was going to show us the village, which is exactly what we didn't want. We wanted to be free to wander and talk with people as we needed to. But instead, he took us to lunch, and basically tried to get us so drunk that we would be able to do nothing else but pass out.
It worked?
No. He ended up passing out. He underestimated us. These are his granddaughters. This is his daughter. I mean, these kids are just lovely and delightful. This was during lunch. This is Avid, who was our driver. We found him in Stepanakert, and he took us up into the mountains here. This is during the meal. You'll see one of the offending weapons right there. And there are about 6 of those. That's a vodka bottle, empty at this point. We found out that if we ate a lot of lavash, which is this flatbread, this regional flatbread, it would absorb most of the vodka, which it did. So we then were given a tour. He retired halfway through it, of this area. This was a museum. And remember, this was all part of the Soviet Union until 1991. And there's just a lot of, this is all just bombed out, desolate, destroyed. Give you some idea of the savagery of that war. No one's playing volleyball there now. Vertiginous country, just very, very beautiful place. You'll see a rebuilt house right there. Belongs to these people who came from yet another conflict zone. They fled, originally they fled from Iran and came from Armenia. He is also working at the elementary school. She's attending it. The faces of these people I found extraordinary. Just resilient and timeless. She's going back from lunch to school. This woman is another person who sort of washed up onto the shores, a victim of civil strife and conflict. Her son was killed in the war, and she had nowhere to go, so she came to what was left of his house, where she was now living with her mother, who at the time was 92. That was me in 2010. That's her mother sleeping there. That was proof to the college that I was actually doing some work and not just traveling around getting drunk. As you see, this was the view out of her backyard. This is just very, very beautiful countryside. The very sad reality of this particular place is these people are pawns in a geopolitical game. The Nagornons know that some kind of treaty, as do the Armenians, and as do the Azeris, at some point there's going to be a resolution to this, and in exchange for giving up the security zones, they'll recognize Nagorno-Karabakh. That's my best guess, but it won't happen for a while. So what happens to the people who have been lured there to settle, to give the illusion that this is now being populated by ethnic Armenians? They'll be sacrificed. That's what's going to happen. I have no idea what her future is going to be. She's a 17-year-old girl. She graduates high school. Where's she going to go? This is a country unrecognized anywhere. This is where things stood as of 2010, and they haven't changed at all. That is still the position of the Azeris. If you think the Russians are the heavies and the evil players in all of this, I think you're going to find yourself very mistaken. They are rational strategists. They are the guarantors of the status quo here. The Azers know that if they try to go back into Nagorno-Karabakh, what happened in South Ossetia will happen to them. So there is this very uneasy truce that is broken repeatedly in the nether regions of the security zones. But who knows what's going to happen there? Abkhazia is a very interesting place. There's the Abkhaz flag. And you can see South Ossetia, which I haven't been to, is this area that Russia did actually recognize as independent. What the South Ossetians want, however, is to be part of Russia. The Abkhazians don't really care. There's no reason why they should. There are 3,000 Russian troops camped outside of the capital city, Sukhumi, which is this lovely little place. At the invitation of the Abkhazes, the Georgians won't dare try to take that region back. Both of these were carved out of the Republic of Georgia. According to Western political analysts, this was done to make sure that Georgia remained destabilized. However, there are other points of view as well. For example, the dominant industry in Abkhazia, which used to be a tourist area, it's just south of Sochi, by the way, and we went in by foot at a border crossing. Then this was before the Russian Olympics, and so this whole area of Sochi was being developed. It was fascinating. This is a paradise for illegal banking, basically. The dominant industry in Abkhazia are unregulated Russian banks. You say, well, what is in it for Russia? That's what's in it for Russia. It gives them a whole nother, basically, black market financial structure with which to operate and do whatever they please. In the case of the Nagorno-Karabakh, it was a very different thing. It is supported primarily by ethnic Armenian immigrants from all over the world. There's base metals in Nagorno-Karabakh, and there's also an emerging gas and oil pipeline that will take gas and oil to Europe. These are all geopolitically sensitive areas. In the case of Abkhazia, you've got the Black Sea area, you've got tea, limited agriculture because of climate and the mountains, but it's semi-tropical along the coast. What you have are banks, and lots of them. This tells a similar story. Ethnic Georgians in 1989, 46%. The Abkhazes were 17%. 2003, you can see it's not as drastic as Nagorno-Karabakh, but it tells a very bitter story, at least for the Georgians, who lost grievously in this war. Doesn't exist, but it does. I like this place. Horses roamed freely on the roads, as did cattle. And this is on the way to the capital city following the Black Sea. This used to be the headquarters of the Communist Party in this Abkhaz region during Soviet times. you can see what's happened to it. It is a bombed out shell that is left there as a monument to the war. The Georgians took incredibly severe casualties, especially in the capital city. They were slaughtered without any restraint by the Abkhazis, who would argue, well, we were only defending our homeland. I wonder what's going to happen to kids like these two. What future do they have? Again, this was an old winery right here. This is an interesting city. We liked it a lot, but there's not a whole lot left to it. On the surface, this is all a very calm place. The people are quite calm because the Russians are protecting them. They're not the heavies in this case. The Georgians would argue otherwise. But as you can see, the parts of the city that remain intact are very lovely. This was a Stalinist building at the base of what became a very interesting research station for primates. And the rumors were that under the Soviets, they were trying to breed humans with apes to create a superhuman fighting force. What this really was a primate research area and played a critical role in the Soviet space program. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, this has become a museum to monkeys, basically. It is a very interesting place. This is the 274 steps or something from the street up to this museum. And along the way, there are people who are selling you bags of fruit to feed the monkeys, which is all well and good until you actually feed the monkeys. And I know this, unfortunately, for a fact. Isn't he adorable? Do you see what he's now holding in his hand? Those are my glasses. They were my glasses. You see that sign? What that sign says is, do not feed the monkeys. These tourists, by the way, are Russians. A lovely place. The city itself is odd and whimsical. There's a pedestrian walkway that circles the city so that you can be on the sea the whole time and sort of walk around. This is only a city of about 30,000, so we're not talking a large area. When we were there, unfortunately, we were stranded in the city for 3 of the days we were there because the storm drains don't work. And with the slightest rain, the city floods. And that's what happened to us. This is at dusk. A lot of people just out. This is what the city looks like. That was a view from our hotel. That's my friend Nikolai, and there's a really nice restaurant, and the cats and dogs roam free. And we like that. This is again downtown. What you don't see here is the dominance of an illegal banking industry of the Russian mafia, which in a sense is the Russian government. It is very much in their interest to have these unregulated banks, yet they control them. Yet they can also deny that they do. That's what this city looks like. That's what Abkhazia looks like in the city. They have hopes to bring back gambling casinos and build resorts with Russian money and recreate what was the Soviet Riviera. I wish them luck because it's a beautiful place. The other reality here is that the government maintains control through very interesting mechanisms, one of which is a group of war widows and other women who have lost their children in the war, who perpetuate the grievances that prompted the war in the first place. This is just an odd detail on the drive up the coast. Just give you a flavor, this was one of the many Soviet-era hotels that are now just blackened shells. This woman is holding a picture of her dead son. Now, it is important to keep in mind that these are the ethnic Abkhazes here. And the fact of the matter is that the Georgians took 5 times as many casualties during that war. But in their eyes, the Georgians were the aggressors. I love the faces in the Caucasus. This is a wild and area of savage beauty, like the NKR. These people are bonded to the trauma of that civil war. In a sense, their mentality is stuck there. In that glass is called chichi, or cha-cha. What it is it's like white lightning, except it's made from grapes. It's about 140 proof. This woman is drinking a tumbler of it. She was our guide through this area. Again, the faces, it's just fascinating. These aren't the victims of ethnic cleansing. These are the cleansers, these people. And I want to go back to this area and try to get a better understanding of how they saw this whole thing through their eyes. And withhold judgment, just stand back and record their stories. A lovely, peaceful scene. The last place is the Pridnestrovyan Moldavian Republic, which features prominently in this book, but this is not the same place I wrote about. It was a dark neo-Stalinist hellhole when I first went there in 1998. It was so great for me to be able to see this weird, creepy, sinister place. I went back in 2015. I had been there a few other times, mostly because I wanted to be accurate. And the impression that one would get from that book is that the PMR is this dark, sinister, tragic region, which in fact it is no longer. What they wanted then and what they want now is to be part of Russia. A referendum was held, deemed fair but not recognized by the EU in 1996, which stated very clearly, 2006, that 95% of the population wanted just to be absorbed by Russia. The problem is that Russia is not contiguous. Transnistria is carved out of this area of the Republic of Moldova. At one point, in 2015, it was feared that, 2014, it was feared that this growing war of secession in parts of Ukraine would create a de facto area that would make Moldova, in fact, and therefore Transnistria, contiguous with Russia, at which point it would be absorbed. That hasn't happened. The situation remains frozen as it was in 1991. But the people have their own flag, as in Abkhazia and Nagorno-Karabakh, their own army, their own currency, their own government, and their own shrines to the fallen. In 1991, the government of Igor Smirnov, I'm not making that name up, was formed. And this was a squalid kleptocracy. But in 2009, a new government was formed, democratically elected, and by all accounts, responsive and responsible to the people. And what has happened in a cruel twist of fate is that this breakaway republic is doing better than Moldova now. These are all the, graves to the fallen. And this is how the government perpetuates, in one sense, its legitimacy. I wouldn't say that it's Marxist, but they're very proud in keeping what was left of the social safety net. Lenin is still revered. And the capital, Tiraspol, is now a very lovely city. At least it certainly was in May and early June when I was there in 2015. Relaxed, prosperous. This is the main street, 25 October. A nice place, which is the last thing I would have ever expected it to have turned into. This is the city hall. Again, Lenin there. There's not what I would call an open, free media, but we're also talking about a country of 600,000. Nagorno-Karabakh is 140,000. Abkhazia, 120. These are small areas. What we're seeing here was the anniversary of the end of World War II also, and the 25th anniversary of this breakaway republic. It is a crucial area, or was for the Soviet military, their southeast staging area for an invasion of NATO should a war have ever erupted. Russian Orthodox Church, very dominant here. Again, this is one of these so-called frozen conflict zones that remains frozen, but life here, well, these two, you don't want to meet them. This is the owner of the hotel I stayed at, and his friend. They were lavish with their entertainment, we'll put it that way. This is in the countryside, a village outside of the capital, and my friend Alexei, who runs a travel agency in Tiraspol, and this is his aunt, and took a road trip with him for a few days, just exploring the countryside. These are his nephews. This is, any of you have visited the website for Lost Nation Books. Life has this real sense of normalcy. This is one of the many posters celebrating the victory of the Soviet Union over the Germans. It is called the Great Patriotic War. You will not see this kind of celebration in Moldova. And this is an example of how history belongs to the locale. For the Moldovans, the Soviet period was an era of repression, culturally and physically, and occupation. For the Transnistrians, it was a war of liberation, freeing them from the Nazis. It all depends on which side and which language you're speaking sometimes. But the reality of modern-day PMR is that it's supported generally. These are all monuments to World War II and the Great Patriotic War, none of which you will see in Moldova. You won't see it in Latvia, Lithuania, or Estonia, who also regarded the Soviet period as a time of hostile, aggressive occupation. Again, Lenin. Not a scrap of litter on these roads. That's Alexei's business partner right there, and that is me, in front of this very whimsical statue. And this was Dubasari, which was the one power plant that served both Transnistria and Moldova. This was a little beach area along a river. Again, just this very calm sense of normalcy. Vladimir Lenin always in the background. Fishing, buying auto parts. There is a new president, Kravchuk, who remains popular. This woman directs the Jewish Center in Tiraspol. World War II, when the Nazis came through, most of the Jews in this region of the Pale were either killed on the spot or shipped off to concentration camps. So this is basically a community center for old folks, most of whom survivors of that war and happen to be Jewish. And there's probably 1,200 left. This was the Holocaust Museum in this center, which is supported by the Transnistrian government. Again, another monument to the Great Patriotic War. Here is an example, again, of illicit banking. Most of the new construction in Tiraspol, the capital, instead of being of military significance, are banks, Russian banks. unregulated Russian banks, or at least certainly not regulated by the Russians. They claim plausible deniability. Well, we have nothing to do with it. Again, the constant barrage of Great Patriotic War anniversaries. These are in Dubasari also, and those are graves of the fallen Transnistrians. 25 years celebrating the persistence of this unlikely country, our homeland. So that's basically a quick tour of 3 of the 4 frozen conflict zones. They exist, and yet legally they don't. What will happen in these areas, I have no idea, but they remain potential flashpoints in an uneasy truce. Can I answer any questions?
Yes, I do have a question.
Yes.
If somebody from Transnistria wants to come to the United States, what kind of a passport do they have?
Anyone from Transnistria automatically has a Moldovan passport, because, you see, the Moldovans don't recognize Transnistria. As far as they're concerned, they're part of Moldova. They can have a Moldovan passport. They can have a Russian passport. They can have both of them. It's odd. For the Abkhazians, it's a little more difficult. They can have Russian passports. The Nagornons can have Armenian passports. Although technically they should have Azerbaijani passports. If I went to cross the border into Azerbaijan and they saw the MKR visa in my passport, they wouldn't let me in. Ditto into Georgia if they saw the Abkhazian passport. They wouldn't let me in. I mean, the Abkhazian visa. Jane?
Yeah, kind of on the same note is how you travel to these countries. The last country that you just spoke about. One country you talked about, you were asked the papers, you were surrounded by not military, but this last country that seems to be more progressive. How was it in that country? Just your United States passport, and you were able to tour the country without any...
You mean the last country?
Yeah.
I did the same thing in Abkhazia. I mean, I could go anywhere I wanted.
Okay.
But there were some odd things in Abkhazia, which was that we had made contact with some journalists before we went, Nikolai and I had. And all of a sudden, when we got there, they avoided us. They pretended they were busy. They pretended they had other obligations when they, in fact, didn't. But clearly, they were reluctant to associate with us. As to why, I can't say. I just know that they were. Yes, school.
Professor, do you see any redeeming qualities of Vladimir Putin? And what about the likelihood of Russian Soviet invasions in these countries?
In Abkhazia, Putin, I'm sure Putin's very popular. He's certainly popular in Transnistria, in the PMR. As far as the Nagornons go, remember, Armenia is part of this Eurasian customs union that is essentially brokered by Russia. Armenia has been historically very close to Russia and the Soviet Union, of which it was part, since 1905 and then more recently 1915, when essentially the Russians saved them from oblivion at the hands of the Turks. So the Armenians have an affinity for Russia, okay, very close relations with Russia, and by extension so does Nagorno-Karabakh. Remember, the Russians enforced that truce in 1994. As to what Putin would do with those areas, it's very problematic for Russia because they're not contiguous, for one thing, and they don't want to get that involved. The status quo, for a number of reasons, serves their purposes. Certainly in Abkhazia for banking reasons, Nagorno-Karabakh for perhaps more strategic energy reasons, and Transnistria They're sort of stuck with Transnistria. Yes?
I was thinking about, and you showed an apartment building that there was a lot of laundry hanging out.
Mhm.
I understand that dryers are kind of a luxury, but I was just wondering, do they have electricity? Do they have a water supply? Is the sewer system working?
Sometimes.
Okay,
So, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't.
okay. So power is not,
And you're referring to Shushi, so life there is tough.
yeah.
And that's part of the historic core. It's not like Abkhazia, so those people are there to stay, they hope. There's no resurgent industry. And the economy in all these places is very opaque. You know, how do these places survive? It used to be Transnistria survived because of Russian mafia money. But it was also, and remains perhaps, a huge transshipment point for criminal enterprises, including smuggled automobiles from Europe, gray market automobiles into the Caucasus and the East, drugs coming from the East, stolen gasoline and diesel fuel, and, alas, human trafficking. These are all somewhat lawless regions, which is one reason why I may still be alive in that I don't go around poking my nose into questions asking about the mafia. Not smart.
What languages do you speak, or did you understand their language, or their dialects?
I had Nikolai with me, who speaks Russian and Romanian, because he's Moldovan. And, you know, for all these places we went, this was part of his country for most of his life, being a Soviet person. So this was a whole different reality for him. He's fluent in Russian. When we needed to, we had translators. For Abkhaz, which is a dialect, there's like 150 languages in that one region right there, and they're all very tribal, and different villages speak different languages, or variations of the same. I speak a little Russian. Romanian isn't helpful except in Transnistria, but everyone speaks Russian in Transnistria. And I speak no Armenian.
Thank you.
Yes?
There may not be an answer to this. Just that I know of the Armenian, with the Turks, the Armenians, and so I was very surprised to hear about the Armenians exterminating these areas. I mean, the people who had that happen to them. What caused that to happen?
That's such a beautiful question.
There is no answer.
What's the question?
The question was what the Armenians having been themselves. How did they come to a place where they were doing the same thing to these areas? So
Short memories.
One could argue necessity from the point of view of the Armenians, but yes,
was it
there's
territory first? Yes.
it's a hideous irony here. And the cleansers were the cleansed. And so it goes. But I'm really interested in how people can act with righteousness doing such unrighteous things.
These different generations.
I'm sorry?
They were different generations.
Yeah. But, you know, these people never forget anything. The tribal mentality of the Caucasus. You know, look at the grievances in the Balkans. You know, 8,000, years ago this happened, your grandfather did.
600 years ago what happened, and we're bringing it back.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, we're going to avenge this. What happened in the mountains, we won't tell. But these are blood feuds, essentially. And you would not expect the Armenians to have acted as they did. But put yourself in their position. They declared independence from Azerbaijan in 1991. No longer being citizens of the Soviet Union. They did not choose to be citizens of Azerbaijan. Same with Transnistria, same with Abkhazia. In their mind, they had a righteous cause. And who were the Azers to come in and try to obliterate them? So this was a savage war fought, in a sense, for their own defense.
So the Azeris came to where the Armenians were the other way around.
I'm sorry?
It was the Azeris who attacked them?
Yes.
I see.
The Armenians said, okay, we're declaring independence. And the Azeris said, over our dead bodies, you will. And that's what happened. It was over their dead bodies. But there was a lot of help from Armenia. They clearly had a vested interest in this. These are very complicated political situations that defy easy solutions or even easy explanations.
But aren't there also religious conflicts?
Yes.
To me, the great irony is that the God that the Muslims and the Christians and the Jews worship are the same for one, and yet there seems to be no understanding that from this one God, which was Jewish, emanated the Christian and the Muslim religions. And yet, I mean, I was brought up Methodist, there was never any discussion of that until I took a course at UVM in comparative religion. But that's what I don't understand. The Russian Orthodox Church, which is, in Russia, is very interesting. You don't go near the high altar and all that stuff. But there seems to be an irony there that people don't seem to understand. I've never been able to.
Look at Ireland.
Yeah, look at Ireland.
Protestants, Catholics.
The Huguenots in France. I mean,
Unfortunately, it is our history writ large, and I think we're condemned to repeat it. The interesting thing about these places is to the west, the Westerners know nothing about this. Maybe some of us know something about the Balkans, but
then you should say something about her son, stepson.
My stepson's name is Tyrone Shaw, and he wrote a book about Moldova from a actually comic standpoint, but he spent a lot of time in Moldova and stayed with a family of physicians, and they were running a child care center called the Tyrone Child Care Center now. All the royalties from his book now support that child care center. He was appalled by the center and how lacking it was in physical therapists and occupational therapists and supplies and equipment, and how tough it was to get anything over there from England or elsewhere to help the situation. But his work of 20 years and the royalties to his book got the attention of somebody in Britain, and he just got an award to become a member of the British Empire, which happened at Buckingham Palace on the 5th of December, and I was there to witness it. That doesn't tell you a lot about Moldova, but it does say that there is he goes over twice a year to fundraise over there. He also, for another book that he wrote, went to the top of the pops in Romania for music that he created.
No.
Kind of interesting.
Very interesting.
Moldova is a very interesting place. It figures also prominently in this book. I work there occasionally and like the Moldovans a lot. They're all, on one level or another, these sort of fringe areas, very sad places.
Now, are they Russian Orthodox? Or really have they accepted?
Moldova, like Latvia, is afflicted with about a 66%, in Moldova's case, Romanian population, and Latvia is Latvian, and the remainder is mostly Russian. So you have these divides that persist in those countries, but the religion in Moldova is the Romanian Orthodox Church, unless you were an ethnic Russian, and then it's the Russian Orthodox Church.
I'm curious about the educational systems in these countries.
They're broken. They're broken and abjectly corrupt. And I'd like to if we had enough time, I would talk to you about that because I've experienced them firsthand, at least teaching at the State University in Kishinev, and seeing what happened to the Pedagogical Institute in Transnistria, which at one point was one of the preeminent universities in the Soviet Union. It's now a joke. And it was decimated by the Civil War, just destroyed. They have no accreditation except in Russia. Yes?
The first two places you talk about, what do they do for their food? How does food come in there? Do they grow a lot of it?
Well, in Moldova's case and Transnistria's case, they're agriculturally very rich areas, and yes, they grow it. Abkhazia, same thing, and they're so close to Russia, they have no problem getting food. And for Nagorno-Karabakh, they grow what they eat, pretty much.
What about, did you have any problems taking the pictures? Did they give you any problems with the pictures?
No, in Transnistria, years ago I would have, but not anymore. But you don't take pictures of trains, you don't take pictures of military installations, because if you do, you'll be in big trouble, especially in Nagorno-Karabakh now, because they're still very, very tense. You just, you don't take pictures.
Professor Tyrone Shaw, thank you so much.